Hi everybody, Steve Matthews here with this week's video update. Yeah, I'm a little bit early this week, or maybe I'm late from last week, I don't know which. But I don't normally do videos on Thursdays, but there was a story this week that was so compelling, I couldn't keep my mouth shut about it. I just had to say something. And I'm talking here about Nancy Pelosi's speech in front of Congress yesterday. That is on Wednesday, I guess that would have been February the 7th, 2018. Nancy Pelosi gave this epic 8-hour filibuster-style speech. I guess they call it a filibuster style. I guess you don't really technically do a filibuster in the House of Representatives, but she pretty much did what amounts to a filibuster, House of Representatives style. And the whole talk that she gave was all focused on immigration. And what was really interesting as I started to research some of the articles about this speech, one of the things that really came through was just how heavily influenced her speech was by her Roman Catholicism. Now, one of the things that I've been doing over the last year and a half or so, I just finished writing I think it was a 22-part blog series on immigration. I call it Immigration, Citizenship, and the Bible. One of the things that I have found in studying immigration fairly closely for some time now is that in my studied opinion, very probably the single biggest cause of the immigration problems that we have in the United States is actually the Roman Catholic Church itself. And sometimes I say that and I think people maybe think I'm being a little bit paranoid, maybe being a little bit over the top about it. But then again, you've got someone like Nancy Pelosi come along. It just makes it so easy to talk about Rome and the problems that Rome causes with immigration that I just can't pass up the opportunity to make a video today. So anyway, that's the sort of the inspiration and the thought behind today's work. I wanted to draw your attention first, and you can see over here, this is an article. It's actually taken out of the Washington Post. From February 7th. And the headline, Nancy Pelosi's filibuster-style speech tops 8 hours in bid to force immigration votes. So she had this big, long speech, and it was really primarily focused on immigration. And as you scroll through here, now here's something interesting. Here you've got a number of people demonstrating for the DREAM Act. DREAM Act now, they're there in the Capitol Rotunda. And some of them were arrested and hauled away. And that's fairly typical for what a lot of the DACA supporters do. They don't have a whole lot of respect for the law, and they seem to think that by demonstrating that way, that's going to get people sympathy. I don't know. I can't speak for everybody, but I know when people act like that, whatever sympathy I may have had for them dries up right away. And I say you cannot deport them fast enough, as far as I'm concerned. But scrolling through here, here's what really caught my attention about Nancy Pelosi. And I'll just read this here to you. It says, Pelosi stood on the podium in 4-inch heels and spoke and spoke and spoke. Quote, I have no intention of yielding back, end quote. She said at 3:41 p.m. Yeah, at that point, she'd been going well over 5 hours. And she goes on here. At one point, she lamented that she didn't have a rosary. So Representative Rosa L. DeLauro, Democrat Connecticut, gave her one. Pelosi read passages from the Gospel of Matthew found for her by Representative Juan Vargas, Democrat California, a former Jesuit missionary. Again, this is one of the things that I think is just fascinating. Of course, Nancy Pelosi, she's a Roman Catholic herself, and she has one of her colleagues in Congress in the House gives her a rosary, and then you have someone else, a Jesuit, picks out scripture verses. Now, I realize this is really anecdotal, and it's not it doesn't give a lot of analysis behind it, but I just wanted to present to you this, because again, it's so typical of what happens when you study the immigration issue. Rome is always there, almost always. And here it shows up, someone talking right in Congress about this. But that's not all. There are some other stories out there. Here's a story from Breitbart News. And the headline there in Breitbart is, Watch, Nancy Pelosi suggests praying all of the mysteries of the rosary on the House floor for DACA amnesty. So not only did she not just ask for a rosary and receive a rosary, but she actually really recommended praying this. And it's kind of interesting. I'll play a little clip of this here for you. This is Nancy Pelosi.
About God's creation, this planet, and our responsibilities to be good stewards of it. So what I'm talking about His Holiness, get to the Bible's part of it. We talked about the Bible earlier. I thought maybe we could say the rosary on the floor of the house, not just 5 decades, the full rosary, all of the mysteries of the rosary. That's 15 decades of the rosary. But nonetheless, I think these people telling their stories are very prayerful. And so we'll use the time.
Oh, that's about enough of that. But I just wanted again to show you this, that again, substantially, the immigration problem in the United States is a Roman Catholic made problem. It's a problem created principally by the prelates, the bishops, the cardinals, the Pope of the Roman Church state, and their foot soldiers, people, for instance, such as Nancy Pelosi, who are willing to push their line very aggressively. Now, this is interesting here. I'm just going to read a little bit of this here. A Catholic herself, Pelosi invoked Pope Francis and Pope Benedict XVI, saying she had been up during the night before, praying so hard about our dreamers, the term given to 3.5 million illegal aliens who are enrolled and eligible for President Obama created Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, the DACA program. So the Democrats have been trying to force this whole issue with DACA. And this was the occasion for Nancy Pelosi's speech. Now going over to here, this is actually from Sean Hannity's website. It was posted just today. This is February the 8th. And I get a little bit more detail about the rosary. Here in the first paragraph, House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi turned toward a higher power during her 8-hour-long speech defending DACA Wednesday, saying she should have brought her rosary blessed by the Pope. So you have the rosary, and then not only is it just a rosary, it's also a special rosary. It's blessed by the Pope. And then she goes on to quote the Pope. She said, I always remember Pope Benedict when he came. He spoke so beautifully. And His Holiness goes on to say, sometimes it's hard to define what justice is, but in so doing, we must be aware of the dazzling blindness of power and special interests. Well, yeah, we really ought to be aware of that. I would certainly agree with that. And of course, one of those dazzling, blinding powers of special interest is the special interest of the Roman Church state. Now, why do I say that? I've used this particular headline before, this particular story, but it bears coming back to because I think, again, this is just, it's very interesting to hear what Steve Bannon had to say. You may recall Steve Bannon. He's the former top Trump political strategist, and he left the administration, I think it was sometime last August, I believe, August of 2017, and he did an interview shortly thereafter with 60 Minutes, and this is another story from the Washington Post, and the headline reads, Bannon Catholic Church needs illegal aliens to fill the churches. Now, Nancy Pelosi said we shouldn't be blind to special interests, but she doesn't seem to consider the possibility that maybe the Roman Catholic Church is its own special interest. And here's what Steve Bannon had to say. This is really interesting, especially in light of this. Steve Bannon is himself a Roman Catholic. I had that quote on there before from Nancy Pelosi. It was on Sean Hannity's website. Well, Sean Hannity's a Roman Catholic. But it's very interesting what Steve Bannon has to say here. And scrolling down, let's see if I can find it. Yeah, here we go. This is what Steve Bannon said. I'll just read this portion to you. Bannon, who is Catholic, accused the church of wanting the steady flow of illegal immigrants coming into the country to fill its church pews and to make money. Quote, unable to really come to grips with the problems in the church, they need illegal aliens. They need illegal aliens to fill the churches. End quote. And he goes on to say, quote, it's obvious on the face of it, end quote. Bannon added, quote, they have an economic interest. They have an economic interest in unlimited immigration, unlimited illegal immigration, end quote. And the interviewer, this happened to be Charlie Rose, he cut Steve Bannon off and said, that's a tough thing to say about your church. And then Steve Bannon continues. He says, quote, as much as I respect Cardinal Timothy Dolan and the bishops on doctrine, this is not doctrine. This is not doctrine at all. I totally respect the Pope, and I totally respect the Catholic bishops and cardinals on doctrine. This is not about doctrine. This is about the sovereignty of a nation. And in that regard, they're just another guy with an opinion. Well, in that respect, we would disagree with Steve Bannon. It's a lot of times Roman Catholics, and Steve Bannon is apparently one of them, seem to have this idea that they can agree with the Pope on spiritual matters, which apparently they define as things that we would think of as church issues or theological issues. But when you get outside of that specifically theological type of talk, that they're free to make up their own ideas. Well, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. I mean, the Pope claims to be God's vicar on earth, and if he really truly is what he claims to be, it doesn't even make sense that someone could say, well, I'm going to follow the Pope on religious issues, but when it comes to politics, when it comes to economics, I'm going to kind of go do my own thing. Now, I'm glad, for that matter, that a lot of Roman Catholics do think for themselves. That's a good thing. I'm glad that they don't all slavishly follow the Pope. But they're really not free to do that, as much as what some of them may think. And actually, the whole immigration issue really is a religious issue. If you go back here, this is a speech that was given back in February of 2017, so about a year ago. And the headline here, it says, "In powerful speech, San Diego bishop challenges organizers to disrupt, rebuild." And so you got this guy, his name is San Diego Bishop Robert McElroy, that's his name. And he goes on and he talks about the basis for Roman Catholic social teaching and really how it relates to immigration. Okay, and here we go. Now I will read this out for you. The San Diego bishop said that, quote, "the fundamental political question of our age," end quote, was whether current U.S. economic structures will receive greater freedom or be directed in a way, quote, "to safeguard the dignity of the human person and the common good of our nation," end quote. So he opposes freedom, greater freedom, to safeguarding the dignity of the human person. Apparently, in his mind, those two things are opposite. And he goes on, quote, "In that battle, the tradition of Catholic social teaching is unequivocally on the side of strong government and societal protections for the powerless, the worker, the homeless, the hungry, those without decent medical care, or the unemployed," end quote. And McElroy said this to rolling applause. Well, again, what he's saying is that the Roman Catholic Church supports big government. The Roman Catholic Church supports socialism. He doesn't use those words, but that's what he means. And of course, he's right. That's exactly what Rome historically has always done. Rome is very much opposed to limited government, to capitalism. It favors big government, socialism. That's how Rome rolls. And here's the final quote, and I think this is really important. Quote, "This stance of the Church's teaching flows from teaching of the book of Genesis, that creation is the gift of God to all humanity. Thus, in the most fundamental way, there is a universal destination for all the material goods that exist in this world. Wealth is a common heritage. It is not at its core a right of lineage or of acquisition." So did you get that? Wealth is a common heritage. That's a nice way of saying the bishop in the Roman Catholic Church are communists. They're communists. They believe in collective ownership. That's what communism does. Communism believes in the state ownership of all goods, of all the goods of production, I should say. So you have this bishop who's saying that the church's teaching about immigration and socialism and whatnot flows out of Genesis. But here you have Steve Bannon, on the other hand, saying, well, he respects the bishops on their stance on theology, but he doesn't respect what they have to say about politics. Well, there's no separation between politics and theology in the Roman Catholic Church state. There's no separation between those two. You can't have the one and have the other. This Bishop McElroy says it right here. Their social teaching, including the teaching on immigration, flows from this idea of Genesis that the world belongs to everybody in a communist-type fashion. Anyway, so that's about all for this week. Thanks very much for watching. Don't forget to like this video. Also hit the subscribe button. Thanks so much. This is Steve Matthews. Talk to you next time.